I have now the great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Barbara Steveni. Barbara conceived and co-founded with John Latham the Artist Placement Group, APG, in London in 1966, which later was renamed O&I and acted as a precursor to many notions of artists in residence and public art programs now. Earlier today, Peter Cook suggested this dédicace to Cedric Price. And if we dedicate the marathon to Cedric Price, we should also dedicate it to the memory of John Latham, who ever since Douglas Gordon and I visited him for a first time in the mid-90s, had always told us about manifestos of time. And you find actually one of John Latham's manifesto in the little booklet which you all have. Barbara Steveni is currently active as an artist, as a curator, and also as a lecturer. She is engaged in a personal work under the title I Am an Archive, which is tracing through a series of walks, revisits and interviews, her life and role within APG and also O&I. A very warm welcome to Barbara Steveni and her manifesto, Context is Half the Work.
Well, like context is half the work. I'm standing in front of a banner which I made when I was invited to Petersburg. Oh, microphone, good idea. Yes, sorry. I was going to stand there last night when I was doing the tech run-through. Okay, yeah, this banner is a construct of the Civil Service Memorandum in English and then the translation into Russian, and it is what we negotiated with our central government here, the Civil Service Memorandum, which we called the treaty, which was our negotiation with government. So I have it here behind me. My actual, manifesto, which I call Context is Half the Work, let me read it. Okay. Context is half the work. This central axiom, my manifesto title, developed from APG practice in the 70s, and it carries today a necessary component for current and future action for art, or for any other activity for that matter, which engages or impacts on another. Constructed to traverse time, place, and discipline, this approach does not impose on any context, place, or person, but rather suggests engagement between the artist on the one hand and invitation by the potential host on the other. And so the manifesto, or the principles, are from a text, an APG text, to the Centrum for Kulturforschung in Bonn in 1980, but it's the premise on which we've always negotiated, or I've negotiated, or the artists have negotiated, a position within an organization, because the very act of going into commerce and going into government, of course, was highly questionable at the time, and maybe still is, but this is what our principles were. So this text emphasizes the following guideline engagement principles for an effective form of association of artists with organizational structures. One, that context is half the work. And again, I refer to how context can traverse time, place, and discipline at any time. Two, that the function of the medium of art is determined not so much by the factual or concrete object as by the process and levels of attention to which the work aims. By level of attention is meant the consideration of human long-term identity. Three, that the proper contribution of art to society is art, that society is starved of an important ingredient if creative individuals are kept out of the working parts of governments, organizations, and institutions. This is not to suggest that other individuals, specialists, are not creatives, but the position of the artist was what was being talked about here. 4, that the status of the artist within organizations must necessarily be in line with other professional persons engaged within the organization. And 5, that the status of the artist within organizations is independent, bound by invitation, which is very important, rather than instructions from authority within the organization, departments, company, to the long-term objectives of the whole of society. And 6, that for optimum results, the position of the artist within an organization should, in the first stages at least, facilitate a form of cross-referencing between departments. And in the original treaty, the Civil Service Memorandum, we managed to get the Civil Service Department actually began to write our brief for us in Civil Service Ease, but leaving the important things was the open brief and the not knowing what it was that they were going to get, but they were going to pay for it, and organizations would pay for it without knowing. And I often say my best achievement was to get the capitalist structure to pay for not knowing, but that's on the side. So to add to, and so that for optimum result, and 7, that the artist's brief remains open. Negotiations are contingent upon both participants having this understanding and a mutual confidence. This requires intelligence and strength in art and a reciprocal response from administrations. To these principles and premises for engagement, I add in the context of the greed economics of the day, that's a quote from Tony Benn from the Darwin Lectures, that the artists and host organizations question with rigor their motivation for engagement. And perhaps Tony Benn, I keep quoting him, you'll see why, Tony Benn's questions he lists when addressing people in institutions with power apply equally here to artists when considering, engaging, and working with a potential hosting organization. And his questions are, what power have you got? Where did you get it from? And in whose interest do you use it? And to whom are you accountable? And how do we get rid of it? Rid of you. And so I find myself very much bookended in my decades of activity between the events and happenings of the 60s and our association with Yoko Ono, who's coming on any minute, and Tony Benn as long-term people who seem to have been there. And I sort of feel that Tony Benn stands for a statesman and a politician who can traverse what has to be said to go along with some party or other. As he said himself, I'm leaving Parliament after 45 years to devote myself to politics, and this is what he does. And so I'm going to hand you over to Tony Benn. And so we ought to have a Tony Benn thing coming up here. Right. We organised this yesterday that this would happen, so it will happen. I'm not terribly keen on you, but he actually was going to come to our... I can. Oh, so that's why we're here today. Yeah. Is to do. He came and did this in our archive in the Tate because he was having his 80th birthday. So I'm going to hand you over to Tony Benn.
Right.
Okay.
The letter from John, he ends up here.
Some of the really interesting letters come when it goes right through when he was in office and out of office, and it's personal letters and it's ministerial letters. Here is the letter. This is an important letter. It's the letter from where he introduces us to Barbara Castle, and he says here, however, I have in mind that suitable opportunities for the placement of artists are likely to be found most easily in large organizational structures and in human relations situations. This leads me to suggest that you might care to consider approaching Barbara Castle to explore possibilities in the social services for which her department is responsible. you referred, I recall, to an artist as an engineer in concept, and that sounds to me as though it might have a number of applications in the health service. The amount of correspondence and pressure and keeping at it that had to be done to get any of these things to happen, but to have somebody like Tony Benn behind it is a constant. In activating this archive, which moved artists out of the studio into these so-called dirty contexts of commerce and stuff, what directions can we hope to influence?
Well, I remember you came to see me. I was Minister of Technology from 1966, and you came with this proposal that artists should work in industry and in departments, and I was excited by that for a number of reasons. First of all, because you pointed out that an artist gave a totally different perception of what was going on. And this not only gave an artist a new idea of what was going on, but also gave the people who engaged very often in bureaucratic hierarchies or engaged in simply doing their job, gave them an idea that there was something more about what they were doing than they themselves realized.
Absolutely.
If you look back over history, the people who've made history are the people are really the scientists and technologists, and actually that is what shapes society. The real revolutionaries are the engineers, and then political people have to come to terms with it. But if you do that in a mechanistic way, you obliterate the human relations and the mental conceptions which an artist brings to it. Because an artist sees it in a wholly different way from the way it's seen by people who do it. And yet the people who do it, when they see how the artist sees it, get excited by the nature of their work. And so it's the influence of the one on the other, and
So
the
it's
other
the
on
two
the one that
disciplines
excited
again,
me.
yes.
All the really interesting things in life are where two disciplines interact. So everything you said to me excited me. I have no artistic talent of any sort or kind, but I did, as this pile of letters shows, encourage you over a very, very long period. And I'm absolutely delighted the archives have been made available, because I'm an archivist myself.
You are indeed.
I've got nine garages full of papers
I can't
that
bear
I've
to think of
accumulated
it.
every day. And archives are an opportunity for one generation to understand the work of an earlier generation, but also inspire the new generation to do the same.
What is your optimism about lobby groups being able to influence at this time?
Well, it raises two questions. First of all, to what extent do we control what happens? And that is the democratic argument. Up until the 19th century, ordinary people had absolutely no control whatever in this country of the government. Up to 1832, Parliament was elected by 2% of the population. So the answer to your question must be, do we have any control?
Yes.
And now, with multinational corporations and globalization, people have lost control again, because business is more powerful relative to
That's
people.
what we're talking about, a lobby, and your optimism here.
Well,
You
it
state
depends what you
empowering
do.
society,
I mean,
yes.
people say to me, what do you think is going to happen? And I always say to journalists, your job is to forecast the future. My job is to try and influence it, which is
Yes,
a totally
yes.
different thing. I think that, of course, in a way, whether we're artists or members of parliament, or whether we're technologists or managing directors or trade unions, we're all people.
Well,
and we mustn't ever forget that
Yeah.
there is a little bit of every bit in all of us. I mean, to have organised the Artist Facebook group, you must have a touch of administrative skill, may I say so, because your correspondence would do credit to a government department. So don't think you're just an artist any more than I'm just somebody who spent
Thank
my
you
life
very
in
much.
politics.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think
They're
I don't
people.
believe in breaking people up into little sections. We're all people. And everyone has an artistic
Yeah.
and an administrative
Yeah,
and a
yeah.
creative
Yeah.
talent. Everyone has a destructive and bureaucratic
Yeah.
capacity. And so what you do by all this interplay is to bring out all there is in everybody. And I think society finds it easier and more convenient to
make the
maintain the
categories.
hierarchy,
Yes, yes.
so that nobody gets out of their place. Moving
What
the
a-
goalposts in a level playing field
Oh,
and putting
God.
it out for consultation.
Oh, no, don't.
And dealing with the vulnerable people
Yeah.
in an international community and bringing about regime change. All this is the language of rubbish. But it's
Absolutely.
designed to keep us in our place
Place, yeah.
by using words we don't normally use and
Yeah.
making us feel inadequate.
Yeah.
And what I think perhaps the ultimate benefits you've conferred is you've given people confidence. And all the naming and shaming and league tables and failing schools, it's the language of the management consultants.
It's
who
hideous.
absolutely destroy humanity in the interests of allegedly maximising productivity and profit, make a lot of people very, very miserable, and in the end don't succeed in enriching society, which is what life's supposed to be about. And I think what you've done is to break down the barriers, and that's what excited me at the time.
Thank you.